Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to share my top 5 historical fiction novels. If you followed my channel for a while, you might be aware I actually don't read a lot of that genre, but I do have some favorites. Honestly, they're not the most underhyped books, so if you are an avid historical fiction reader, you might already be aware of these, have possibly already read them, but these are my personal favorites. These are the books that I absolutely love and have made me interested in reading more from the genre. So all that being said, let's get started. First book I want to mention is Outlander by Gabaldon. I've read the first book in her big epic series, and this book starts out in the 1940s. It follows a nurse that worked on the front lines during the war, and now that the war is done, she's going on a second honeymoon to Scotland with her husband. And something happens, she ends up touching some rocks and getting thrown back in time and ends up in the 1700s of Scotland, which is a time that was filled with war and raiding. In order to survive, she ends up forming a relationship with a man named Jamie in order to get some protection, and the story really goes from there. Like a lot of the other books I'm going to be mentioning in this video, this one definitely crosses into some other genres. It does have that science fiction element when it comes to time travel, and also is very heavily focused on the romance. So I just adore this book. I do need to mention that it certainly has some difficult subject matter in it. It is controversial because it does deal with abuse and other really inappropriate situations, so it depends on how you feel about that being represented on the page. And despite that, I just adored this book. I thought it was just gripping, and I was surprised how immersive I found the reading experience. I haven't actually continued on with the series yet, but it's one I keep meaning to. And this first book definitely could be read as a standalone, but for me, it was just great. I love Scotland, and this book really made me want to go travel there. So this is one of my all-time favorite historical fiction books, and I cannot stop gushing about it. Next, I want to talk about a book called The Reader by Bernhard Schlink, and this is a book that is translated from German and is set in Germany, and it follows a young boy who, when coming home from school, falls ill and collapses on the street. A woman finds him, takes him in, and takes care of him. From this event, they form a very inappropriate romantic relationship because she is an adult and he is a child. But the story goes from there. Eventually, she disappears and he doesn't know what happens to her. And then years later, he runs into her again when he is attending war crime trials related to World War II. He finds out that she has been accused of doing some horrendous things, and the story really explores so many themes. I don't want to spoil too much. It's a very short book, but it definitely left an impact given that inappropriate romantic relationship. This book is controversial. Not everyone is comfortable reading it. I don't mind some difficult subject matter, so I was able to push through, but it's the kind of book that just leaves you thinking about it years later. I read this probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I still think about it, and it just is a book that demands revisiting and is one that I would highly recommend to a whole host of readers. So another book that I just adore. I really like books set around World War II, and this one definitely left an impact on me. Another book I absolutely love is The Other Typist by Suzanne Rindell, and this follows a woman named Rose who works as a typist in the police precinct when another typist comes to work there named Odell, and Rose becomes obsessed with this new typist and gets pulled into her crazy life of jazz and speakeasies. From that description, you can probably guess that this book is set during the 1920s, which is definitely a period I'm quite fascinated by. And what I liked about this book is that it does blend historical fiction with another one of my favorite genres of suspense, because it's a book about obsession and intoxication, and you just get the feeling that there's something else going on, that there are other layers to the story that aren't quite described on the surface. I don't want to say more than that, but if you like historical fiction with a bit of an unusual twist, this is definitely one I recommend. One of my all-time favorites, which is why it's on this list, and I would just love more people to read it because it's probably one of the more underhyped books on this list today. Now I want to talk about Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay, and this is a book set in Paris during World War II, where a Jewish family is living and the Germans come to their house and tell them that they're going to take them away. the young daughter believes that they're only going to be gone for a short while. And so in order to protect her younger brother, she locks him in a closet, and the story basically goes from there. And the story also has a contemporary timeline to it because there is a journalist in modern day Paris that is investigating what happened to a lot of the Jews in Paris at that time. And so she ends up basically following Sarah's story and figuring out what happened. She finds out that she actually lives in that same house that that Jewish family lived in all those years ago, and the stories get interwoven as it goes along. I have to preface this by saying, given it is a World War II story with a focus on the Holocaust, this is extremely difficult to read. There is some very dark and harrowing scenes and imagery in this book. It is not for everyone. It is not something that is easily palatable, but if anyone can handle it, it's well worth the read. I think that these stories are so important to revisit and understand the horrific nature of what happened, and it's a story that definitely left an impact on me. I do think that the historical elements were stronger than the present day, but I think the contemporary elements at the same time really did make the book more accessible for readers like myself that don't read a lot of older books set in these older time periods. So it's a very good entry point into historical fiction, and if you can't tell, I highly recommend it, just like all the other books I'm mentioning. And finally, I want to talk about The 19th Wife by David Ebershoff, and this is about the fundamentalist church led by Brigham Young back in the day in Utah. The story particularly follows one of his young wives and her story being married to this man and eventually falling out of the church and actually going and fighting against it in the courts. And the story also has a contemporary timeline following a young gay man named Jordan who was thrown out of his own fundamentalist church because of his sexual orientation. And as these stories tend to do, the two timelines basically interweave and you get to see how they are connected. The reason I like this book so much is because it was such a deep dive into polygamy and this fundamentalist culture. I find the topic particularly fascinating. I've read quite a bit on it, and this book was just so well researched, interesting. I listened to it on audio, which was very well done because it is a book with several different perspectives, and highly recommend it. It was just fascinating. So if you also are fascinated by the topic of polygamy, this is one of the best historical fiction books, in my opinion, to pick up. So those are my top 5 historical fiction books at the moment. I'm sure this will change over the years as I read more, but that is where I want to end this video, is actually asking you to recommend me some of your favorite historical fiction books, particularly ones that you think are accessible to readers like myself who haven't read tons of the genre, and maybe are books that deal with a crossover with another genre that I do read. So love your recommendations. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.